It's a funny thing how time tricks you into thinking we've come so far. You, for instance, might imagine that dating today is complicated. Ghosting. Apps that encourage you to judge someone's soul based on 3 filtered selfies and a witty caption about sourdough. Or maybe you think the Middle Ages were peak dating misery letters hidden in prayer books' secret meetings at the risk of public flogging and possibly being locked in a convent just for liking the wrong person. And you wouldn't be wrong. But then comes the Victorian era. The age of tea virtue empire and tightly laced everything, especially expectations. If dating in the Middle Ages was dangerous, dating in Victorian England was suffocating. Not because you could die from it, but because you could never quite live through it as yourself. Everything you were allowed to say, feel, or even glance at was regulated, controlled, edited for decency. And you're about to spend 24 hours inside that lacy, corseted world. So take a breath not too deep, the corset won't allow it, and join us for this slow, whispering tumble through parlors and calling cards, societal codes, and scandalous fans. If you survive this, a dating app might feel downright liberating. If this story made you smile or sigh in relief that you weren't born in 1852, please subscribe and share it with a fellow history lover. Your support helps us craft more calming, quirky journeys through time. And tell us, where in the world are you listening from tonight? It's always magical to see how far these sleepy tales can travel. Sweet dreams, and thank you. Now onward to your first date, or should we say, your first supervised introduction. You wake up in a room that smells faintly of lavender water wool blankets and old books. Not your books, of course. You're not encouraged to own too many of those, unless they're morally uplifting. But there's a small volume of Cowper's poetry on the windowsill placed there for show. The light is still soft, filtered through a heavy lace curtain. But the moment you move, you feel it corset lines already biting into your ribcage. The day hasn't started, and yet you're already encased like a parcel, wrapped in good intentions. Before your feet even touch the floor, there's a knock. It's not breakfast. It's your chaperone. She enters like a ghost with an appointment book. Aunt Agatha, or perhaps Mrs. Whipple, she goes by many names, but they all function as guardians of your virtue. She does not smile. She does not blink much either. Her presence is like cold tea, expected and unavoidable. She informs you that Mr. Percival Hargrave will be visiting this afternoon. You are to be ready by 2. There will be a walk, weather permitting. You are to be seen but not present. You are to engage without engaging. You are to be appropriate. Your pulse quickens, not because you're excited, though you might be, but because you remember what's at stake. A single misstep, a moment's levity, even a misplaced glance could ruin not just your afternoon, but your social standing, your marriage prospects, your entire future. Victorian romance, you see, is a chessboard with lace trim, and the queen is always being watched. In this world, you don't initiate dates. You don't go out. You're called upon. A gentleman may leave his card at your home indicating a desire to pay his respects. If your mother or chaperone deems it acceptable, he may return at a later time to sit with you in the parlor, but only if others are present, preferably knitting. Ideally knitting while pretending not to eavesdrop. These visits are not spontaneous. They are orchestrated. There is no, hey, want to grab a coffee? There is instead, Mr. Hargrave intends to make his appearance at precisely 2 o'clock, and you are to receive him in the yellow drawing room. Your reaction to this is irrelevant. You are a hostess in training, not a human being with preferences. And so, the day begins with ritual. Your hair is set into curls too loose, and you appear careless, too tight, and you risk looking severe. Your face is powdered lightly. No rouge is for actresses and other women of low moral elasticity. You are dressed in 3 layers camise corset crinoline. The weight of expectation literally rests on your shoulders, your hips, your lungs. You descend the stairs, not like someone excited for a romantic encounter, but like a soldier on the way to a ceremonial inspection. You will sit beside him, but not with him. The settee is arranged with a respectable 12 inches of embroidered space between you. There is no physical contact, not even an accidental brush of fingertips. Should your gloves touch his when accepting tea, you must neither flinch nor linger. It is expected that you will make conversation, but only within safe, tepid topics. The weather is ideal. The queen is always admirable. Books are acceptable. If he brings up poetry, you may reference Tennyson, but only his early work. And certainly not The Princess, it borders too close to feminist musings. Your chaperone remains seated, seemingly engrossed in embroidery, but absolutely tuned in to every syllable exchanged. One misplaced comment, one improper tone of voice, and you may find tomorrow's walk quietly canceled. Your reputation hinges not on what you say, but on how you sit while saying it. This courtship performance isn't built for connection, it's built for assessment. He is evaluating your posture, your piety, your potential dowry. You are evaluating his income, his prospects, and, if you're very daring, his smile. But even that is a private evaluation. To let it show would be indecent. And yet somehow, couples did fall in love. Or at least something that looked a lot like it from across the room. A glance held half a second too long, a shared laugh that almost escaped the boundaries of politeness, a casual compliment. Miss Gray, you play the pianoforte with remarkable grace, and your response equally restrained. How kind, Mr. Hargrave. I do so love Chopin's nocturnes. They suit rainy days. Subtext scandalous. Here's the kicker, even if he's genuinely interested, he cannot be too eager. Victorian courtship demands subtlety. A gentleman who rushes is considered impolite. A gentleman who lingers without formal intent is a cad. There is quite literally a socially sanctioned time limit on how long he may gaze in your direction before it becomes presumptuous. This is not a dance. It's a minefield. A beautifully choreographed, perfumed minefield. And the chaperone, she is both map and landmine detector. She may cough if he leans too close. She may clear her throat if your voice carries a hint of warmth. She may knit furiously when she disapproves, but cannot interrupt. Still, the afternoon proceeds. The conversation glides. You discuss tulip bulbs and the merits of cold compresses for summer headaches. You sip tea with both hands. You do not slouch. You do not fidget. You certainly do not giggle. And when he rises to leave you curtsy just so, not too low, that's desperation. Not too stiff, that's pride. He bows. The chaperone nods barely. A success, perhaps. Who can say later, you ask if he might call again. Your aunt says, we shall see. Translation, she will consult your mother, check his family's financial situation, and inquire whether he uses too much cologne. You return to your room. The corset is finally loosened. You exhale fully for the first time today. The memory of his compliment floats in your mind like the scent of pressed violets in a warm room. Victorian dating, if we dare call it, that is not for the impulsive, the honest, or the impatient. It is for the artful, the regulated, and the enduringly restrained. And this was only the beginning. You never realize just how many layers it takes to disappear until someone else dresses you. The morning has barely begun, and already your body is no longer yours. Two maids flank you with an air of practiced detachment, and your reflection in the dressing mirror is an assembly project corset here, bustle there, ribbons tied just so. You're not preparing for a date. You're preparing for judgment. And in Victorian society, appearance isn't just a reflection of taste. It's a declaration of worth. The process starts with your chemise-light cotton, designed to keep your sweat from staining anything valuable. Then comes the corset. It's not something you can lace yourself. One maid holds it steady. The other pulls the cords with a rhythm that has little to do with mercy. Your ribs surrender gradually, your breath shortens, and your silhouette takes shape. Not your natural shape, but the one deemed appropriate, slender waist, lifted bust, rigid poise. This is the body of someone respectable, or so they say. Now the petticoats begin. One, then two. A third embroidered because Mr. Hargrave's aunt is rumored to be particularly fond of decorative hem stitching. The crinoline comes next, a stiff bell of fabric and steel that fans around you like a moving cage. Each layer rustles with purpose. You're becoming an ideal, or perhaps an illusion. Your shoes are heeled narrow and just shy of comfortable. Your stockings must match the color of your gloves, and your gloves must be pristine, white unscuffed symbols of moral cleanliness. They are so delicate that you have a second pair in case the first is dirtied before tea. After all, you might be pure of heart, but if your gloves are grubby, no one will care. Your hair is arranged into soft curls and pinned precisely. It may not move, but it must appear to have moved naturally. No ringlet can hang out of place. The pomade smells like violets. Your jewelry is minimal too much sparkle, and you appear vain. Too little, and you risk seeming plain. The line is fine and constantly shifting like everything else in Victorian womanhood. By the time you're declared presentable, you've been standing still for the better part of an hour. You haven't eaten. You haven't spoken. You've merely been adjusted. And somewhere under all that lace and linen, you begin to feel less like yourself and more like someone else's curated version of you. This isn't a dress for walking. It's a uniform for navigating unspoken rules. When you descend the stairs, every step requires care. Your corset limits how far you can bend. Your skirts ripple with each movement. You must glide. Women don't walk in the Victorian parlor since they arrive. And if you're too fast, you're unrefined. Too slow, you're seeking attention. Just like your neckline modest, but not severe, your pace must suggest natural elegance that took 2 hours and 4 women to produce. And then there's the fan. It's folded now, discreet, clutched like a secret. Later, it may serve as your only voice. Tilted a certain way, it might suggest openness. Closed tightly, it could signal disapproval. Dropped intentionally, it might whisper attraction. But for now, it stays tucked against your palm, silent and ready. Your mother watches from across the room. She says nothing about your appearance. That's a good sign. Praise would be vulgar. Silence means success. Aunt Agatha adjusts a doily and pretends not to stare, though she's memorizing everything from the angle of your parting to the crispness of your cuffs. Mr. Hargrave is due soon. This is not a costume. It's armor against gossip, against scandal, against invisibility. Because here's the truth. Victorian dating isn't just about catching a suitor. It's about catching the right one, the right way, with the right accessories, and the right posture, so that everyone in the room, including the one holding the teacup in the corner, decides you are worth pursuing. Even then, you're not the one doing the pursuing. Mainstream history often paints Victorian fashion as a symbol of elegance, but historians still debate whether women themselves viewed it as beauty or burden. There are journals filled with admiration for lace and pearl, yes, but also private letters confessing to fainting spells, bruised ribs, and a deep hunger for 1 hour just one without the corset. And yet, despite the discomfort, some women found ways to express power within the system. The angle of a bonnet, the defiance in a pattern, even a scandalously modern brooch tucked half hidden in lace. One woman, Lady Emma Ainsworth, famously wore lilac gloves to a royal garden party, a color that hadn't yet been deemed appropriate for unmarried ladies. It was whispered about for weeks. She later married a duke. Even choosing not to wear certain things could be a statement. A missing brooch might suggest mourning. A single strand of hair left untamed might mark you as artistic poetic, or if misread, slightly mad. Everything you wore was a conversation whether you wanted to speak or not. And of course, the ultimate taboo, comfort. No Victorian lady of high society could admit to prioritizing comfort. Even if your shoes pinched and your corset made you wheeze, the only acceptable response to, "Are you quite all right?" was a smile and the words, "Perfectly so, thank you." Weakness, like romance, had its own script. To deviate was to invite commentary, and commentary could turn quickly into consequence. So as you settle into your drawing room, skirts arranged just so, remember, you are not simply dressed. You are prepared, not for love exactly, but for eligibility, for scrutiny, for a series of delicate negotiations carried out over lace and porcelain, with the stakes as high as marriage itself, and the margin for error nearly invisible. Outside, the sun is bright, but you mustn't squint. Inside, the tea is steeping, and the air smells faintly of lemon biscuits and rose water. A servant straightens the edge of the carpet. Aunt Agatha sits near the window, angled like a ship ready to intercept. You hear the distant sound of carriage wheels turning onto the lane. And in that moment, you remember you're not expected to be relaxed. You're expected to be ready. There is a knock at the door, not the brisk utilitarian kind for deliveries, nor the heavy-fisted kind reserved for servants. It is a composed, deliberate knock, the kind that announces not just arrival, but breeding. Mr. Percival Hargrave has come to call. You do not rise to greet him. That would suggest eagerness. You remain seated, hands folded lightly in your lap, eyes fixed just to the left of the door. When he enters, you rise exactly halfway through his bow, just enough to be polite, not enough to suggest enthusiasm. Your chaperone, of course, is already seated, occupying the most central shadow-free position in the room where nothing escapes her line of vision. And just like that, your courtship begins. Not that anyone would dare call it that. In the Victorian era, the very concept of dating, as we understand it today, was foreign, even vulgar. There were no boyfriends, no casual coffee meetups, no whispered plans for Friday nights. Instead, there were calls, introductions, and social visits, all arranged, timed, and supervised, with a meticulousness that would make a military officer proud. Your conversation is carefully choreographed. Mr. Hargrave begins by inquiring after your mother's health. You respond warmly, but with restraint. He compliments the garden view. You nod with soft agreement. Neither of you dares broach anything resembling intimacy. The social script allows for discussions of weather travel, and occasionally the arts provided. They are mainstream, tasteful, and inoffensive. You do not discuss your feelings. You do not ask about his. He may admire your embroidery. You may politely admire his waistcoat. But neither of you dares acknowledge the obvious, that this performance is not merely a conversation, it is a public audition. For you, for him, and for the invisible ledger that is quietly being filled out in the minds of everyone who watches. Historically, these tightly regulated encounters were part of a formal structure known as the courtship process, which in upper and middle-class Victorian England followed specific phases. A gentleman would first leave his visiting card, a small personalized piece of thick paper that included his name and title, at a young lady's home. If her family approved, he might then be received in the drawing room, always, with a chaperone present. Only after multiple such visits, and often only if financial and familial compatibility were confirmed, would a more personal form of correspondence be permitted. This wasn't just tradition, it was social protection. A single unchaperoned meeting could cause scandal, particularly if the woman's virtue, or more precisely, the public perception of her virtue, was questioned. In fact, one of the most cited etiquette guides of the 19th century, Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, explicitly warned against allowing young women to interact with men privately before a formal engagement. The logic was simple: if stifling, where propriety ended, ruin began. You're aware of all this, even if no one says it aloud. You can feel the tension under your gloves. Mr. Hargrave sips his tea, careful not to slurp. You compliment his mother's last charity ball. He acknowledges it modestly. Neither of you steps outside the unspoken boundaries, though you both circle their edges. He asks if you've read the latest Dickens. You smile, say yes, and make a vague but intelligent comment about moral uplift. He seems impressed. Your chaperone does not twitch. This is encouraging. Still, you can't help but notice how much of this conversation isn't happening. You're not permitted to ask about his beliefs, his fears, his actual intentions. Does he find you interesting? Does he like clever women? Would he be uncomfortable if you spoke your mind? These are things you must divine from subtext. How he sets down his teacup, whether he glances at your hands or your eyes, how long he hesitates before rising to leave. The moment he does leave, he bows. You curtsy. There is no touch, not even a handshake. Physical contact of any kind before engagement is simply not done unless sanctioned by family and reputation. The rules are clear, even if your feelings aren't. And what of those feelings? You wonder as the door closes and the parlor air settles again. Are they supposed to be there yet? Or are they meant to develop later, once property has changed hands and rings have been exchanged? You're not sure. In fact, you're not sure you're supposed to ask. Here's the strange part. Many marriages were formed this way. Some even became happy. But how does affection survive in such a dry climate? Perhaps it grows slowly like ivy, creeping over time, attaching itself where it can, surviving on whatever warmth is available. Or perhaps it withers quietly and simply folds itself into duty. Historians still argue whether these courtship rituals were primarily tools of oppression or subtle forms of female agency. On one hand, women had very little control over whom they saw, what they wore, and even how they could respond to unwanted suitors. On the other hand, those who understood the rules could sometimes play them to their advantage, using silence as power suggestion, as resistance, and even mild disobedience as flirtation. One particularly eccentric example is the story of Charlotte Milbank, a vicar's daughter from Surrey, who in the 1860s allegedly developed her own code of conversation topics to steer undesirable suitors away. If she brought up potatoes more than 3 times in an afternoon, it meant she found the gentleman dull. If she mentioned her aunt's gout twice in 1 hour, she hoped never to see him again. Her system, recorded jokingly in letters to her sister, may not have been widely adopted, but it reveals something important. Within restrictions, some women found room to be clever, but cleverness had to be quiet. Subtlety was the only acceptable form of rebellion. And the problem with subtlety is that it's exhausting. You walk upstairs later that day, still unsure whether Mr. Hargrave likes you or whether you like him. You didn't say anything wrong, but then again, you didn't say much at all. Your mother asks how it went. You smile and say, "Lovely." This is not a lie exactly. It's a placeholder for all the things you cannot put into words, not because they're forbidden, but because they've never been taught. The language of courtship isn't about communication. It's about concealment. You hide behind phrases like most agreeable and charming disposition, while your heart, if it has anything to say, is told to sit down and behave. And still, you wonder, will he call again? Not because you're swept away. Not because he dazzled you with wit or whispered something scandalously poetic. But because in a world so carefully arranged, even the hint of attention feels like a thunderclap. That night, you place your gloves on the dresser fingertips, still cool from the touch they never got to feel. You sit at the edge of your bed corset, finely unlaced spine sore from the day's posture, and wonder whether the next visit will be different. It probably won't. But then again, you only need to survive one more day of this. You wake the next morning feeling not so much rested as preserved. Your dreams were crowded tea trays, gauzy curtains, the sound of your name said just slightly too formally. And somewhere in the midst of all that, the image of Mr. Hargrave had slightly askew asking about Dickens, as if it were a confession. The memory doesn't make your pulse quicken. It makes your shoulders tighten ever so slightly in the space where duty lives. The corset goes on again. Of course it does. By now, your body knows how to accept it, like a well-trained sigh. There are no new visitors scheduled today, but you know better than to relax. In this world, a lady's value is not in how she loves, but in how she waits. Poised, Gracious, proper, just in case. After breakfast, delicately poached egg, no grease, no garlic, you're summoned to assist in some embroidery. Not that you'll get much done. Today, your task is to sit in the drawing room window with your hoop and needle in hand, half stitching and half listening for the sound of carriage wheels. Because if he is going to call again, it will be soon. Anything longer than 3 days, and it starts to look like he's having doubts. But your mind isn't really on Mr. Hargrave. It's on yesterday, on how much was said without saying anything at all. And then it lands on the fan. You pick it up from the side table, a painted paper creation, its ribs carved delicately, its surface smooth and cool in your hand. Yesterday, it was an accessory. Today, you realize it's a language. Not yours, not quite, but one you're expected to master all the same. In Victorian society, the folding fan wasn't just a prop, it was a communication tool. In an era when women could not openly express romantic feelings, gestures became vocabulary. Holding the fan to your lips meant "I wish to speak with you." Drawing it across your cheek whispered, "I love you." Dropping it signaled, "We should be friends." Sounds romantic, quaint even, but behind that subtlety was the same tight-laced silence that governed everything else. It wasn't freedom of expression. It was expression under surveillance. You sit straighter in your chair, fan resting in your lap. You're not expected to use it today, not really. But it should always be visible just in case. After all, one never knows when a gentleman might arrive, and it would be quite improper to communicate anything with actual words. And what if he does come? What will you say? Or rather, what will you allow your fan to say? Yes, I remember your waistcoat. No, I do not wish to promenade in the garden. Perhaps if the chaperone can't hear us. Of course, you'd never say such things aloud. But a flick of the wrist, a tilt of the fan, and your meaning could flutter past the lace curtains like a rumor on the breeze. You're not alone in this code. Every well-brought-up girl learns the basics. Some treat it like a game practicing behind closed doors, giggling over which movement means what. But others, those who live closer to the edge of propriety, use it with deadly seriousness. A misplaced signal can ruin everything. One woman in Sussex was rumored to have been jilted at the altar because she nervously tapped her fan 3 times, not realizing it meant, "I wish to be rid of you." Her fiancé took it as gospel and fled to the continent. She later married a much older man with a limp and a passion for parsnips. Historians still debate whether the language of fans was truly standardized or more of a playful conceit. Some argue it was largely a romantic fiction perpetuated by etiquette manuals and fiction writers. Others believe that in tight-knit circles where gestures carried weight and gossip was currency, the fan did indeed become a meaningful, if imprecise, form of communication. In truth, it likely depended on the setting, the people involved, and the stakes at hand. But regardless of its exact function, the fan illustrates a broader truth that in Victorian courtship, women were expected to speak without speaking. They had to become fluent in implication, in smiles that didn't show teeth, in pauses long enough to suggest vulnerability, but not so long as to seem dull, in careful shifts of the eyes, the shoulders, the ankles, all things that today might seem inconsequential. But in this world, they are everything. Later in the day, you're asked to accompany your aunt on a short visit tea with Mrs. Renshaw and her niece. It's not a romantic occasion, but it is social and therefore strategic. Mrs. Renshaw is well connected. Her niece is not yet betrothed. Your presence is not merely polite, it's competitive. You arrive just after 3. The drawing room smells of bergamot and overcooked scones. Conversation revolves around flower shows hymns and a recent report about a bishop's unfortunate fall from his carriage. No one asks your opinion on anything, but you are expected to nod, smile, and occasionally murmur, "Indeed." The fan rests in your lap, an accessory of both status and strategy. Across the room, the niece, Miss Eleanor, is doing something bold. She's tapping her fan lightly against her chin. Once, twice. Her eyes flicker toward the window. You follow her gaze and see a gentleman walking past. Not stopping, not calling, but very much within view. You glance back at Eleanor. She is composed, demure, and very clearly hoping he noticed. Did he? That's not for you to say. But you understand her position. You understand how in a world where everything is suppressed, even the smallest gesture becomes electric. The tea ends. The carriage returns. You go home tired, not from activity, but from attention. Every gesture, every word, every glance today was part of a silent exchange. And the silence weighs heavier than the corset. Before bed, you unfold your fan once more and look at it in the mirror. It's lovely, intricate, completely useless in a heat wave, but also something more. A symbol of how much you must compress, restrain, and encode just to be seen. Not heard, not understood, just seen. You wonder, how many women learned to speak in that code? How many messages were sent misunderstood or missed entirely? How many affections were crushed under the weight of a single misread gesture? And in that moment, you realize something quietly heartbreaking in Victorian dating. The tragedy isn't in what's forbidden. It's in how much effort is spent not saying the things that matter. You close the fan, and with it, the day. The morning begins, much as the last did, with measured breathing, and the quiet hiss of laces tightening behind your back. The corset bites a little more today, not because it's been pulled tighter, but because your ribs have started to surrender. Your body is adapting inch by inch to the shape the world expects you to hold. You're not sure whether that's resilience or resignation, but either way it's working. Word arrives by mid-morning. Mr. Hargrave intends to call again. A second visit, not unexpected, but not guaranteed either. It is in polite terms encouraging. Your mother offers no expression, only the smallest nod. Your chaperone tightens her grip on her embroidery, somewhere deep in the back of your mind. You feel a flicker of something resembling anticipation. You carefully suppress it. By now, you understand the rules of this little dance. But today, something new is at stake. Because this time, it isn't just your posture or your vocabulary that's under scrutiny. Today, he is being evaluated. And not by you. No, that task falls to the most powerful woman in your life, and not the one who gave birth to you. Your mother is watching, yes, but it is your potential mother-in-law who holds the real authority here. If she approves, the courtship can proceed. If she finds fault, it can wither on the vine before the next tea is poured. And what constitutes fault is as wide and shifting as the English countryside. Too much laughter, too little income, an accent too far north, or a mother who talks too much at garden parties. Today, Mr. Hargrave is bringing his mother. You are reminded in whispered tones to wear your second-best brooch. Not your best, lest you seem showy. Not your plainest, lest you seem dull. You are also advised to compliment Mrs. Hargrave's hat, even if it's dreadful, and to avoid expressing any strong opinions on literature, politics, or heaven forbid religion. The drawing room is staged like a set fresh flowers, freshly dusted pianoforte, a cushion strategically fluffed to suggest comfort without laziness. Your fan rests beside your glove box, tilted just so. Your mother arranges herself like a portrait, regal but maternal, warm but distantly so. And then they arrive. Mr. Hargrave is polite as ever. Mrs. Hargrave is a pillar of civility with eyes that miss nothing and a smile you could balance a teaspoon on. Her gloved hand is cool, her voice syrupy but measured. You compliment her hat just as rehearsed. She thanks you with the kind of nod that means, "I noticed that you noticed." The conversation begins. It is light. Birds, weather, the upcoming charity fete. But make no mistake, beneath this surface chatter runs a current of assessment. Mrs. Hargrave is not here for tea. She is here to see if you can be managed. In Victorian courtship, the role of the prospective mother-in-law was not ceremonial. It was decisive. For middle and upper-class families, marriage was a strategic alliance. A woman's temperament, upbringing, and household skills were all fair game for evaluation. And while fathers might approve contracts and dowries, it was often the mother who determined whether a young woman was suitable for the complex, unwritten demands of her future station. Mainstream historical records, particularly letters and diaries, reveal that many mothers-in-law took their gatekeeping role seriously. They considered everything from a girl's posture to her family's reputation, from how she spoke to how she remained silent. A woman could be disqualified for laughing too loudly, for walking too fast, or even for eating too quickly at luncheon. One historical tidbit comes from the letters of Lady Rosalind Tenterden, who described her mother-in-law's rejection of a potential bride on the basis that the girl kept a poodle in the house, which suggests poor instincts and unreliable moral hygiene. The girl in question was never invited back. You sit straighter as Mrs. Hargrave comments on the embroidery in your lap. It's a modest compliment, but you sense the test behind it. Are you humble enough to deflect? Are you gracious enough to accept? You smile nothing too wide and murmur, "I'm grateful my stitches behave better than I do." A tiny chuckle. Your mother's teacup clinks gently against its saucer. Success. Perhaps, but your own thoughts are harder to sort. Do you want this woman to like you? If she doesn't, will you mourn the opportunity or breathe more freely? You catch Mr. Hargrave's eye for a moment. He is pleasant, mild, agreeable in the way that all suitors are meant to be. You can't quite imagine him shouting or whispering anything particularly memorable, but he is safe in that blankly reassuring sort of way. He would never ruin you. But he might never see you either, not really. That's not the sort of thing you can ask your mother-in-law. The visit ends, as all good visits do, with warm smiles, restrained bows, and promises to see one another again soon. You close the door with your heart still undecided. But your mind knows the score. If Mrs. Hargrave is pleased, then this courtship will proceed. If not, you may never hear from them again, and no one will offer an explanation. That is the beauty of silence. It cannot be challenged. Historians still argue whether Victorian women had any real say in their marriages, especially in cases where familial approval was paramount. Some suggest that strong mothers-in-law were a reflection of matriarchal soft power, a way for women to shape the social ladder behind the scenes. Others argue that it simply reinforced the hierarchy, women enforcing women's silence to maintain control. Whatever the truth, you feel the weight of it now. You sit alone after they leave your gloves folded in your lap, your fan unopened. You are in every way that matters composed. But part of you is still waiting for someone to ask, do you even want this? That question will not be asked. Not today. Possibly not ever. What matters for now is that you passed. At least you think you did. The third visit comes more quickly than you expect, only 2 days later on a Thursday, which is neither formal nor relaxed, just comfortably ambiguous. By now, your household treats these calls with rhythmic precision. The drawing room is refreshed. Your dress is chosen. The tea set is polished to a glaze. You find yourself halfway into your corset before you even realize what day it is. That's how habit forms quietly through repetition that begins to feel like inevitability. But you sense something different today. Not in the air, not in the decorum, but in the edge of your chaperone's voice. She tells you to remember your volume, to pause slightly longer before responding, and to sit slightly farther back on the settee today. These are small things, but small things matter here, especially when the courtship is beginning to look serious. Because this is the part where everything can fall apart. Mr. Hargrave arrives precisely on time. His gloves buttoned his lapels smooth, and his smile well practiced. He bows slightly deeper today. He seems at ease, confident. And yet, it's not entirely clear whether he's courting you or the idea of a future that you simply happen to be part of. Still, he sits down, offers a compliment on the lilacs, and asks about your cousin's piano recital. It is all very proper. Too proper. You reply with warmth measured like sugar into a teacup. The conversation flows, and yet, at any moment, everything could unravel, not from what is said, but from what might be perceived. Because in Victorian courtship, scandal wasn't just something that happened to you, it was something that could be imagined into existence. One word, one laugh, one movement taken out of context, and you could become a cautionary tale whispered across drawing rooms for years. It didn't require wrongdoing, just the suspicion of it. That's why your chaperone sits so close today. Why your mother is suddenly dusting books she dusted yesterday. Why the maid happens to be adjusting the curtains twice. In Victorian England, a single scandal could ruin a woman's prospects completely. There was no redemption arc for a girl whose reputation had slipped. A conversation too long, a letter too frequent, or a walk unchaperoned could be interpreted as forward indecent, or even vulgar. And once the rumors began, they were almost impossible to silence. Mainstream historians agree that Victorian society placed immense pressure on women to maintain the appearance of sexual purity, obedience, and passivity, not just in action, but in every word, glance, and silence. A woman might be utterly blameless, yet still find herself labeled fast or spoiled for something as minor as being seen smiling too freely with a gentleman in public. Take the case of Miss Harriet Keene, a well-regarded daughter of a London solicitor in the 1870s. She was seen walking through Kensington Gardens with a male friend who turned out to be her second cousin. But someone mistook the man for a suitor. The story spread, warped, and returned to her family in the form of a rumor Miss Keene has been seen keeping company with a man of questionable breeding. She was subsequently uninvited from 2 balls, and the following year no formal offers of marriage came. Her cousin married someone else. She remained unmarried for life. That is the kind of destruction possible from a smile, a stroll, or simply bad timing. You keep your smile soft, your laugh brief, but your mind races. What if your slipper slips while walking? What if Mr. Hargrave's hand accidentally brushes yours while reaching for a sugar cube? What if someone sees that and decides it meant something? You remind yourself to adjust your posture, to angle your chin lower, to blink slightly more often when speaking, less intensity, more softness. You know all this, and yet you can't quite stop your heart from hammering in your chest. Not from attraction, but from pressure. You and Mr. Hargrave speak of novels, gardens, the weather, but beneath it all, there's a quiet question hanging in the air, one you can't ask aloud, but both of you are circling. Is this courtship real, or are we merely playing parts in a performance that no one wants to direct, but everyone is watching? You don't know. You suspect he doesn't either. He does something unusual. He compliments your embroidery, then asks very gently what you like to read besides Dickens. You hesitate. You're not sure if this is a test or a genuine moment of curiosity. You reply eventually that you enjoy George Eliot, though you phrase it cautiously. Some of her reflections are quite compelling. You do not mention that Middlemarch made you cry, or that you secretly admire The Mill on the Floss for its unapologetic anger. That would be too much. Your chaperone shifts in her chair. Mr. Hargrave smiles, but he doesn't push. He simply sips his tea. And for a moment, you feel something that almost resembles connection. Almost. But just then, a gust of wind moves the curtain, and your hand reaches instinctively to hold it. In doing so, your gloved fingers brush the sleeve of his coat. Only lightly, only for a second. But it's enough. Your chaperone clears her throat sharply. You both flinch, draw back. The silence that follows is loud enough to echo. You recover, of course. You both smile, resume your conversation. But something has shifted. A line has been approached, almost crossed, and now everything must be handled more delicately than before. Historians still argue whether the extreme rigidity of Victorian propriety was primarily a tool of patriarchal control or a reflection of deep-seated cultural fears about chaos, sexuality, and modernity. What's clear is that women were made the guardians of virtue, but only in the sense that they could be punished for failing to protect it, even when others failed them. That evening, after Mr. Hargrave departs, the house is unusually quiet. Your mother doesn't comment? Your chaperone says only, "The breeze was strong today," with a tone that suggests more than just weather. You climb the stairs, slowly remove your gloves carefully, and sit before your mirror. You think about the brush of fabric against fabric, something so small it could be forgotten or remembered forever. Will anyone talk about it? Will anyone have seen it? You don't know, and you won't ask. Because, in this world, the most dangerous thing is not making a mistake. It's appearing to. You fold your fan, you dim the lamp, and you go to sleep wondering whether tomorrow will still belong to you. The morning after is eerily calm. The drawing room feels quieter, as if it too is waiting for some unspoken judgment. You carry yourself with the same composure as always, but there's a slight tightness in the air, as if everyone is pretending not to remember the brief accidental touch between your gloved hand and Mr. Hargrave's coat sleeve. A single unintended moment, and now the entire rhythm of your household seems to have shifted by half a beat. Your chaperone doesn't mention it. Your mother certainly won't. But the silence speaks clearly. This is how reputations are handled in your world, not with accusations, but with subtle recalibrations. Fewer comments, slightly more supervision, a change in the seating arrangement perhaps. You're still respectable, but you are now ever so slightly being watched more closely. No one says outright that the drawing room may no longer be the safest venue for continued interaction. Instead, your mother suggests that a stroll in the countryside might be refreshing. The air is good for your color. The weather has been agreeable. And besides, it's spring when everything is supposed to bloom. You know better. This walk is not a break from social scrutiny. It's a test wrapped in a bonnet and gloves. You've been to the countryside before, of course, but never quite like this. Not as a potential wife being paraded through flower-lined lanes to see if she can look graceful while stepping around mud puddles, and certainly not under the watchful eye of a family acquaintance pretending to admire the hedgerows while recording every blink of your eyelids. You think briefly that perhaps things might be easier in the country. Maybe expectations there are softer, less starched. But you soon learn the truth. Love in the countryside isn't freer. It's just quieter. The Hargraves have connections in the nearby village. It's not quite a grand estate, but it's still substantial enough to require a gate, a groom, and a view of rolling hills. You're invited for an afternoon gathering, nothing formal, just a modest walk and some light refreshments. Your gloves are packed. A parasol is chosen. You wear boots today instead of slippers, but they still pinch at the toes. Mr. Hargrave meets you with a kind smile and a polite nod. His mother is elsewhere, conveniently so. You are accompanied instead by a family friend of advanced age whose chief purpose appears to be nodding silently and walking 2 paces behind. You set out along the path where wildflowers crowd the verges and the occasional bee hums past like a tiny judgment-free miracle. For the first time, you're not sitting beneath chandeliers. There's space here, air, a moment to exhale without the scent of rosewater or stale biscuits. But that doesn't mean you're free. Even in the open air, your words are calculated. The topic of local church attendance is raised. You say all the right things. He asks whether you've ever visited the Lake District. You say no, but you've always wanted to. You do not say that you once dreamed of writing poems in a cottage by the sea. You don't say that you once read Jane Eyre 3 times in one summer and cried each time Rochester said, "I have no heart." You keep those things to yourself. Still, there's a gentleness to this conversation that's different. A looseness, maybe. He seems less like a suitor and more like a man who also doesn't know how to hold the moment. And that's something. But even here, nature cannot erase the structure. The walk is timed. The tea is served precisely at 4. You are not permitted to linger near the barn without an escort. You are certainly not allowed to rest under the sycamore tree unobserved. Everything is beauty filtered through control. Mainstream historical sources confirm that rural Victorian life, though less visibly rigid than London, drawing rooms maintain deeply entrenched codes of social behavior. In fact, courtship in the countryside was often more strategic, especially among landowning families. Marriages were not only emotional unions, but literal boundary negotiations between farms, between fields, between generations. If your family owned land, your marriage might decide whether your neighbors remain neighbors or became competitors. This was especially true in small villages where every eligible match could shift the local balance of influence. Romantic affection was a luxury, not a prerequisite. Historians still argue whether rural women had more freedom in matters of love, or simply fewer people to impress. Some assert that the slower pace of life allowed for more natural connections to form unburdened by constant supervision. Others suggest the opposite, that in small communities the walls felt closer, the gossip swifter, and a single misstep could last a lifetime. You feel this contradiction firsthand. As you sip tea on the terrace, watching the fields stretch out in all directions, it feels like you could just be. No lace, no pianoforte, no over-polished conversation. And yet, the moment you speak too candidly, mentioning perhaps that you once wrote a short story your father never read, Mr. Hargrave blinks. Not unkindly, but with the kind of startled courtesy that means, "Ah, noted." You reel it back. He tells a story about an eccentric cousin who once tried to keep a pet goose in the library. Everyone laughs. You laugh too. It's easier than explaining your thoughts. The countryside walk ends as all Victorian things must, with formal goodbyes and a slow return to the parlor. You ride home with your aunt in a quiet carriage, lulled by the motion of wheels over gravel and the faint creak of wood. She says nothing about the visit. But when you ask if Mr. Hargrave seems attentive, she replies with, "He appears steady." You do not know what to make of that. Later in your room, you sit by the open window. There's a softness to the night air that reminds you of something freedom maybe, but the corset is still there. Even when loosened, it reminds you of the day you've had, the version of yourself you wore like a coat. Pleasant, modest, slightly curious, but not threateningly so. You wonder if the countryside ever truly offered escape, or if it merely offered a different kind of performance. Tomorrow, there will be more questions, more social calls, more gloves to launder. But tonight, the only sound is the wind in the hedgerow and the quiet hum of a world that still expects you to marry someone before you've even decided who you are. You didn't expect to find yourself here not quite like this. Not again. The corset is still part of your morning yes, and the lace still tickles the edge of your collarbone, but the tone of today feels altogether different. There's no bustle of maidens preparing the room, no expectant glances from your chaperone, no Mr. Hargrave calling promptly at 3. Today, your time belongs, however briefly, to no one, because you're not a debutante now, not a girl hoping to become a wife. You're a woman who has already been one, a widow. It sounds dramatic, like something Shakespeare might have whispered, but in Victorian England, being a widow was not so much an identity as it was a social status with very clear, very complicated rules. It didn't matter if your marriage had been passionate or arranged, joyful, or stifling. Once your husband died, you entered an entirely new chapter of life, one stitched together with silent ceremony and suspicion. The black came first. Mourning attire wasn't optional. It was expected, enforced, sometimes admired. You were to wear black crepe jet jewelry, black gloves, black veils, and a black bonnet, often with crepe that fell over your face like a veil of private grief. For a full year and a day, you were to live inside that blackness. No exceptions. Not even if your husband had been a brute. Not even if you didn't miss him. That year is known as deep mourning, and it was no small social convention. If you broke mourning too soon, if you wore color, if you were seen laughing, if you attended a ball, you risked not just judgment, but ostracism. The assumption would be that you were heartless, unfeeling, improper, and worse, that you might be eager to remarry, even if quietly you were. Mainstream historical accounts, including etiquette manuals like The Queen, a popular 19th century women's magazine, offered strict timetables for mourning. After the first year, a widow could enter half mourning, which permitted muted shades like lavender or gray. Full color might not return for 2 years, or sometimes not at all, especially for upper-class women who preferred to emphasize piety and long-suffering over the appearance of moving on. And during this time, love was not to be discussed. A second courtship, should one emerge, had to be conducted with the utmost discretion, under greater scrutiny, not less. Because you, as a widow, were seen differently now. You were no longer an innocent. You were no longer unclaimed. And with that came a mixture of pity-wariness, and if we're honest, fear. You might know too much. Widows occupied a strange place in Victorian society. On the one hand, you had more freedom than unmarried girls. You could manage your own household, attend certain events without a chaperone, even engage in mild flirtation provided it was done tastefully and under the veil of assumed experience. On the other hand, that very experience made you suspicious. Some widows were seen as dangerously independent. Others were expected to fade gently into the background of familial life, perhaps helping raise a niece or tending to charitable work. The idea that a widow might want to marry again and worse for love was not encouraged. Historians still debate whether widows had more power or less in this time period. Some argue that widowhood offered women a rare window of autonomy. No longer bound by fathers or husbands, they could make choices for themselves, manage their own money, and even turn down proposals. Others point to the relentless social pressure to remain respectable, to not call attention to oneself, and to quietly live out one's days in muted dignity. You think of all this now, as you stand by your dressing table fingering the brooch he once gave you. It wasn't particularly grand, a silver leaf with small pearls, but it had meaning once, and perhaps still does. You haven't worn mourning black in months now, though the habit of caution lingers in your wardrobe. You choose navy today, a subtle step away from grief, but not too bold. You tuck a strand of hair behind your ear and wonder if you look like someone who is still remembering, or someone who is ready to begin remembering something new. A letter lies on the table. It was hand-delivered this morning. The seal unbroken, but the handwriting familiar. Not Mr. Hargrave. He disappeared long ago quietly and appropriately, as men do when a woman becomes complicated. No, this one is from Mr. Edward Bloomfield, an old acquaintance from your late husband's circle, a widower himself. You open it slowly, half expecting it to contain some polite remark, some shared condolence, perhaps an invitation to tea in a garden lined with ghosted memories. Instead, it reads, "Forgive the intrusion. I've thought of writing for some time, but manners and hesitation have conspired against me. If you find yourself walking by the East Path this Thursday, I would welcome the chance to accompany you. Quietly, kindly, only if you wish." It is signed simply E. You stare at the page for a long while. It's not a declaration. It's not even a suggestion. It's a door left ajar. You feel the stirrings of something not entirely unfamiliar, but long dormant. A quiet curiosity, a breath held between chapters. But even this simple note raises questions. Will your neighbors see? Will they assume? Will you be whispered about at the grocer's? You are not a girl anymore, but neither are you permitted full freedom. Love, if it comes again, must arrive in shadow. There's a story you recall told in hushed tones about a widow in Derbyshire who wore a plum-colored dress to a dinner just 8 months after her husband's death. Plum, not even lilac. There was scandal, of course. A week later, she was seen walking with a solicitor. No marriage ever came of it. And she eventually moved to her sister's house near Bath, where she died many years later, still unmarried, still blamed. The moral was never explicitly stated, but always understood: move too soon, and you will be seen as indecent. Wait too long, and you will disappear. You press the letter to your chest, then fold it gently, and place it in your drawer, next to the brooch. For now, it is enough to know it exists. There is no fan language for second chances. No etiquette guide for what to do when your heart stirs at the age of 32. No acceptable way to say, I'm tired of wearing memory as a costume. You return to your window seat and watch the breeze roll over the lawn. If you walk by the east path on Thursday, it will be your choice. That, in itself, is radical. You find yourself by the window again, looking not toward the east path this time, but backward farther than yesterday, beyond the reach of corsets and calling cards. Your thoughts drift, as they sometimes do, across centuries, because even in this tightly stitched world of Victorian propriety, you can't help but wonder, if things are this hard, now what must love have looked like before? And so, your mind travels through misty tapestries of time, landing with a soft and uncertain thud in the Middle Ages. Here in the dim light of medieval England, courtship was not a carefully measured ritual. Over tea, it was something rougher, riskier, and often far more dangerous. Forget lace gloves. Forget gentle suggestions. Dating, if one could even call it, that was a matter not of etiquette, but of survival. You are no longer in a drawing room. You are in a stone manor, or perhaps a wooden hall with rushes strewn across the floor. Your dress is simpler, heavier, less about elegance, and more about function. There are no fans to signal affection. There are songs, perhaps a lute, a look across the fire, but not much time for games. Because, in the medieval world, a woman's marriage wasn't just a personal choice. It was a transaction, a treaty, sometimes a trap. And love was a luxury. Among the nobility, marriage was arranged engineered to consolidate land power and political alliances. Daughters were betrothed as early as childhood. Marrying for love was not just rare, it was suspect. Romantic passion was something found in troubadour ballads, not at the altar. Mainstream historical records affirm this. In 12th and 13th century Europe, particularly in France and England, noble families often arranged matches without much regard for the preferences of the individuals involved. The church technically encouraged marriages to be consensual, but in practice, daughters had little choice. Fathers held the final say, and a refusal could lead to disgrace, or worse. If you were a peasant girl, the dynamics shifted, but not necessarily in your favor. There might be a bit more room for affection sometimes, a say in whom you married. But this didn't mean freedom. Custom and community pressure ruled here. Marrying without your father's consent could still bring shame, or even punishment, depending on local law. And if your affections wandered where they weren't permitted, say toward a man of higher station or one already promised elsewhere, your options were stark silence, exile, or prayer. There's a case that lingers in the folds of medieval history, a young woman named Alice of Staffordshire, documented in a parish record from 1298. She was brought before the church court for inappropriate dealings with a page in the Lord's household. No details survive about what happened between them, But the court's ruling is clear. Alice was sent to a convent for penance. The boy was dismissed, and the matter was closed. This was not unusual. So you learn quickly, in the medieval world, there were no second chances, not for women. Scandal stuck, and forgiveness was not fashionable. Even something as simple as a letter could become perilous. In noble circles, love letters beautifully phrased in Latin or Old French circulated like treasures. But if discovered without approval, such a note could be used as evidence of impropriety or even adultery. The line between flirtation and accusation was razor thin. Historians still argue whether medieval women were entirely powerless in matters of the heart. Some suggest that within their limited options, women did find ways to assert themselves, choosing between suitors, manipulating timelines, or seeking protection through religious vows. Others argue that these cases were the exception, not the rule, that most women were trapped in decisions made for them by men who saw marriage less as a union of souls, and more as an extension of inheritance law. In this time, there is no fan language, no slow promenade through manicured gardens, no carefully orchestrated calling hours. Here, affection blooms in secret, in a glance exchanged while refilling a goblet, in a half-heard song hummed while sewing, in the rhythm of footsteps down the corridor when you know they aren't supposed to be there. But these small moments don't guarantee safety. In fact, they're often the opposite. There is a chilling kind of vulnerability in the medieval love story, because to love and to be seen loving could ruin you or kill you. One of the more famous tales comes from 14th century Provence, where a young woman named Isabeau was said to have exchanged poems with a local knight. When her father discovered their correspondence, the knight was banished, and Isabeau was sent to a convent. The poems survived, hidden in the margins of a prayer book, according to legend, but Isabeau never returned home. Some say she became a nun. Others believe she died young. What matters is that she was erased from the record, as many women were once their love became inconvenient. You look out the window of your Victorian world and shiver not from cold, but from the weight of that remembered silence. You'd always believed your time was harsh, that your choices were narrow, that propriety was a tightrope. But compared to the Middle Ages, your life is a painted cage. Theirs was a stone one. You return to your tea, your gloves, your narrow social corridor, and feel absurdly a sense of strange gratitude. At least here, if someone brushes your sleeve by accident, you won't be married off by force. At least here, if a man writes you a note, it might survive past the altar. But you also know better than to romanticize progress. Yes, the dresses have improved. The ink is more accessible. The walls thinner. But love still walks a careful line, just one, with finer curtains and better lighting. And so your thoughts drift back to the present. Mr. Hargrave hasn't written. You haven't walked the east path. But the memory of the letter still sits in your drawer, folded, tucked beneath the brooch, waiting. You wonder whether Isabeau would have kept hers too. The wind shifts again, this time from west to far east. It drifts through time and space, settling on wooden floors and rice paper walls in a quiet house behind a bamboo gate. You have left behind the soot of England's chimneys and the stiff lace of its parlor rooms. Now your slippers make no sound as you move. Your sleeves trail like whispers. Your heart, though still yours, must beat softly, because in Edo period, Japan, love was not only subtle, it was hidden. You are a woman of good family somewhere in the early 1700s. Your world is one of precision. You bow at the right angle. You speak when spoken to. You write if you must express affection with brush and ink, carefully choosing each kanji, each brushstroke, as though it could decide your fate. And perhaps it could. Here, dating as you know it doesn't exist. Even the word itself is foreign. What exists instead is arranged marriage layered with customs, family duty, and social harmony. If you are from a samurai household, your parents, particularly your father or male relatives, will begin spouse selection once you reach the appropriate age, usually your late teens. Meetings between potential matches are called miai, and while they may seem formal and emotionless, they are deeply serious. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that during the Edo period 1603–1868, marriage arrangements were often handled through go-betweens nakodo, who would deliver family information photographs in later eras and letters. Compatibility wasn't determined by shared interests or mutual affection, but by status, virtue, reputation, and often horoscope compatibility. Love poems were exchanged, but these were composed in restrained coded language, often referencing nature plum blossoms, for longing cranes for fidelity, the moon for the silent passage of time. A poorly chosen metaphor could be the end of your chances. As you move through the narrow hallway of your family home, you pass behind folding screens. Every space is separated, divided. Even family members do not speak freely. You see your mother seated in the garden sipping tea. She does not look up, but you know she's listening. You've received a letter, not from a suitor, not officially, but from someone who once visited your cousin's house. He complimented your calligraphy. His message now is cautious, poetic, and unsigned. The koi swim where the moonlight bends. I wait silent beside the water's edge. You feel the heat rise to your cheeks. You shouldn't have read it more than once. You've read it 7 times. But what can you do with a feeling in a world like this? Your future may already be planned. Perhaps you will marry the merchant's son, or a minor official, or someone with land but little voice. Your own preferences will be considered, but not decisive. If you refuse too many suitors, your family may be shamed. If you express longing too openly, you may be labeled improper. There are reputations to maintain, not just yours, but generations of ancestors behind your name. Historians still argue whether women in Edo Japan had agency in romantic matters. Some suggest that within the upper classes, daughters could discreetly influence decisions through private objections or subtle disinterest. Others argue that true autonomy was rare, and that women who refused marriage or fell in love outside expectations were quietly set aside or sent to live with distant relatives under a different surname. If you were of the merchant class, or lower options were slightly broader, but still bound by family control. And while the arts flourished in cities like Kyoto and Edo, and love affairs could sometimes blossom between courtesans and poets, these stories were not the norm. They were cautionary tales dressed as beauty. There's a famous story of Osen, a woman from Edo, who was admired for her beauty and poise. She was said to have been courted by a samurai who visited her family's shop daily pretending to need inkstones. He wrote her poems. She returned none. Only after he stopped coming did she send one note, a haiku clipped and cool. The ink has dried, but still I dip the brush in memory's cup. Their love, if it ever existed, was over before it began. You think of that now as your mother summons you to the tatami room. A guest is here, another miai, another polite smile, another cup of tea poured at the right angle with fingers positioned just so. The man speaks gently. He is modest, educated, quiet. He praises your embroidery. He makes no mention of koi or the moon. He wears the scent of sandalwood and ink. And you wonder briefly what might happen if you married him not because of love, but because he is safe. When he leaves, your father looks pleased. Your mother says nothing. That night, you sit beside the lamp, unfolding the anonymous poem one more time. You don't reply. Not because you lack feeling, but because your world is one where feelings must remain like the koi beautiful and always beneath the surface. You fold the paper again and slip it into a book of no theater plays. Later, it may be mistaken for a line of dialogue. That would be convenient. The walls around you slide closed. You exhale softly, and the sound is swallowed by centuries. You hardly notice the moment when the air warms and the light grows richer amber dusted with sun. The cool elegance of Edo fades behind you, and the rhythm of sandals on tatami gives way to the bare feet of children playing in the sand, the rustle of linen, and the lazy flap of reed fans beside lotus pools. You've traveled again this time far earlier in time and southward along the Nile. Now you are an Egyptian woman, perhaps the daughter of a skilled artisan in Thebes, or the wife of a scribe in Memphis. The linen you wear is light smooth and bleached by the sun. Your kohl-lined eyes narrow against the brightness. Around you, the air hums with life pigeons coo in the distance, and the scent of honey cakes rises from a neighbor's oven. Your city is ancient. Your customs are older still. And yet here in ancient Egypt, the idea of romantic choice is not nearly as foreign as you might think. Unlike the tightly corseted world of Victorian London or the veiled quiet of Edo Japan, ancient Egypt offered something surprising. Women had rights, especially when it came to love and marriage. Mainstream historical evidence, including papyri records, legal documents, and tomb inscriptions, confirms this women in ancient Egypt could choose their own husbands, own property, initiate divorce, and write marriage contracts with defined expectations and protections. And while families certainly played a role, especially among the wealthy, the final say often rested with the woman herself. You weren't bartered like livestock. You were expected to think, to judge, to decide. It's one of the earliest documented societies where women enjoyed near legal parity with men, at least on paper. Still, there were limits. Romantic ideals were often expressed through poetry, not in direct speech. Lovers, particularly the young and unmarried, wrote verses in praise of beauty longing, or private rendezvous, describing the curve of a neck, or the scent of a beloved's tunic. These poems survive today on shards of pottery and slips of papyrus, capturing a tone so intimate and tender that scholars still marvel at their modern familiarity. You might hear one now murmured through the reeds, "I shall lie down and dream of my beloved's voice beside the pool, sweet as honey, strong as date wine." But despite the tenderness, danger was never far. If you fell in love outside your class or with someone already pledged to another, the consequences could be serious. Inheritance laws and family reputation still mattered. So even though you could, in theory, choose your partner, you still had to choose carefully. A man with too much ambition or too little standing could bring shame. A union without approval might be broken apart. Love in ancient Egypt was not ruled by propriety so much as balance, ma'at, the great principle of harmony and cosmic order. Disrupt that balance, and even affection could bring ruin. There's a story, half history, half myth, about a high-born woman named Bentrishit, a temple singer. She was said to have fallen in love with a soldier stationed in her city. When their relationship was discovered, she was pressured to renounce him, citing her sacred vows. Her final words were recorded by temple scribes. "My heart was full, and that was my sin." Some historians question the accuracy of Bentrishit's tale. Others suggest her story was shaped by later moralists, but her name endures. A footnote in stone, a love that made too much noise. Historians still debate just how much independence Egyptian women actually wielded. Were these rights real or more symbolic? Some argue that while legal texts suggest equality, social pressures likely kept many women within narrow expectations. Others point to evidence of widows running businesses, daughters inheriting land, and wives negotiating terms before marriage as proof that autonomy wasn't just ceremonial. You pour water into a painted clay jar and think of these women, the ones who loved quietly, yes, but who also chose. Who walked out into the sun and met the gaze of a man not from behind a veil or a fan, but with directness. Who might have refused a match or pursued one. Who could write on a piece of linen, "You are the one I want," and have it mean something. Your hands brush against a reed scroll as you tidy the room. It is blank, but you feel the itch of ink anyway. Would you write him something? Or would you wait for his poem, A Neighbor Calls for You? There is bread to share, figs to carry, gossip to hear. Someone says a new family has moved in from the Delta, and there's a son, quiet, broad-shouldered, respectful. You smile, but say nothing. Not yet. Here, in this old sunlit world, you have time. And perhaps, for the first time, in your many lives, you have something else, permission to hope. You step out, sandals tapping against stone, and the breeze follows. You walk slowly toward the market, now your basket swinging at your hip. Your tunic catching the breeze from the Nile. Along the path, two women sit weaving garlands of lotus and papyrus, stems their chatter lilting easy, filled with small laughter. You recognize one of them, Theset, the potter's daughter. She married last year. Her husband is kind, or so people say, but she tells you quietly that they had met long before their wedding day on a feast day by the edge of the festival crowd. They had locked eyes, and though nothing was said aloud, they found each other again and again after that. She chose him, and she smiles when she says it. You turn a corner, and there's a scribal apprentice, barefoot, sun-darkened young. He sees you and nods with careful politeness, then lowers his gaze. You don't know him. He doesn't know you. But his hands are ink-stained, and there's something in his posture, gentle, deliberate, that makes you think of all the things not written, not said. And so you begin to wonder, what would your scroll say? If you were to write your own love poem in your own name, what would it sound like? I do not wait by the pool, nor pray beneath the sycamore. I walk and you find me. You blush, then smile, and you keep walking, knowing that even thousands of years from now, someone might read those lines and understand. Not the history, not the context, but the feeling. And that, perhaps, is the truest kind of legacy. By nightfall, the sky turns copper, and the Nile flows past like a ribbon of molten ink. In your home, the oil lamps flicker against limestone walls. Your mother hums as she combs your younger sister's hair. The cat curls beside the grain jar. There is nothing particularly dramatic about this evening, and yet you feel full, aware of yourself in time, as though your steps leave echoes. Because maybe this is what freedom looked like before the ages closed in again. A moment between harvest and history. A woman in linen by the water, with choice. You tuck away the blank scroll not yet written on, not because you are waiting for someone to fill it, but because you can choose when to begin. The reed scroll fades from your hand. The Nile softens into mist. And before you can place the moment, it's gone, replaced by stillness, porcelain shadows, and the barely audible brush of silk behind a painted screen. You are no longer in Egypt. You are no longer walking freely in the sun. Here the air is sweet with incense and strict with formality. You have arrived in imperial China somewhere in the Ming dynasty, maybe the Qing. It hardly matters. For love, the rules are the same, gentle, layered, and largely invisible. You sit quietly now, your posture, perfect eyes lowered, not out of fear, but out of training. The light is filtered through patterned windows, the floor swept clean. No sound travels far in this house. It's a place of careful architecture and careful emotions. You are a young woman from a respected family. Your clothes are embroidered, your hair pinned with jade, your voice reserved. Even your laughter is trained to be graceful. You've been told since girlhood that too much spirit is dangerous, and that women who speak too freely often end up misunderstood, or worse, unwed. And in this world, marriage is everything. You haven't seen the man they say might be a good match. That's normal. You won't meet him, not truly, until the day of your wedding. Before that, he is simply a portrait. In your family's discussions, a biography passed from household to household. You know his surname, his examination rank, his family's holdings. You don't know his laugh, his walk, or whether he will listen when you speak. That's not part of the process. Courtship, such as it is, happens between families, not lovers. Your parents meet with his. Gifts are exchanged. A matchmaker always involved examines your compatibility through horoscopes and fortune readings. If your birth charts align, if his household has no recent scandal, and if your dowry is acceptable, the courtship will advance. Not with dates or dances, but with a letter. A formal one. Not from him, but from his family's representative. This is your first introduction to the man who might share your bed, your roof, your children. Not through his voice, but through a seal. Mainstream historical evidence confirms that during Imperial China's long dynastic history, marriages were typically arranged by families with little to no direct communication between the bride and groom before the ceremony. Girls from upper-class households were raised to prioritize filial duty over personal desire. Romantic courtship, as we know it today, was not just uncommon, it was considered inappropriate. A woman who pursued affection independently might be labeled disloyal or shameless, casting doubt not only on herself, but on her entire lineage. Still, feelings have always found their way. Sometimes, it happens through poetry written under a pseudonym and smuggled past servants. Sometimes, it's a glance across a garden, or the way your name is spoken just once in a slightly different tone. There are stories of women who fell in love with men they glimpsed during religious festivals, remembered for years, and married others with quiet resignation. And there are stories of husbands who, after years of formal distance, grew to cherish their wives deeply, even composing poems in their honor. But in the beginning, there is a curtain. You remember standing behind one, just like it, when a visiting official came to your home. You were not allowed to be seen, only to listen. His voice was low, polite, confident. You wondered then what his eyes looked like when he smiled. You never found out. He married someone else. Your family had higher hopes. Historians still argue over how much romantic autonomy existed in dynastic China. Some suggest that noble women cloistered and surveilled had almost none, while merchant-class women, especially in later periods, might have had more room to maneuver, especially in love affairs, before formal marriage. Others emphasize the regional and temporal variety. What held true in the imperial capital might not hold in rural villages. What's clear is this: even when love did bloom, it was wrapped tightly in silk and ceremony. There's a famous tale from the Tang dynasty about a young scholar who fell in love with the daughter of a high-ranking official. He saw her only once at a temple, her face partially hidden behind a veil. He wrote her a poem left beneath her window. She replied with a single line, comparing his words to spring rain on jade. They never married, but both became famous in poetry. Tonight, you sit with your embroidery, your fingers moving mechanically. Your mind drifts. You've heard rumors that the man your family favors enjoys flute music and raises koi in the courtyard. It is not much, but it is more than you had hoped to know. You wonder what he might think of you, this woman behind silk and protocol, who memorizes couplets and secretly envies the birds. A servant enters. She bows. The matchmaker will arrive in the morning. You nod without speaking. Then, when you are alone again, you reach beneath your mat and pull out a folded sheet of rice paper. A poem you copied from a scroll at the academy. It reads, "Though mountains lie between us, and 10,000 rituals divide, I leave my thoughts with the wind, and hope you hear them." You fold it again. Hide it. Not because it is forbidden, but because it is yours. In a world where even your shadow belongs to someone else, that poem is still yours. And maybe somewhere behind another curtain, another young man is writing something of his own. Not for approval, not for his family, but for the woman he has not yet seen and hopes to love anyway. You hear the rustle of a curtain, but this time, it doesn't fall between you and someone else. It wraps around you, heavy, beaded, embroidered with gold and dark thread. It shifts not only your clothing, but your very presence. You are veiled now, not behind furniture or etiquette or screens, but behind tradition itself. A gung-hat drawn over the crown of your head. The world is still visible dimly, but it no longer expects your gaze to meet it. You are in Mughal India now. And here your love story is not yours to write. Not fully, not loudly. The palace is quiet, except for the strains of a flute echoing in the courtyard. Below your window, a musician plays. You do not know if the song is for you. You do not even know his name. But you wait behind the filigree of a jolly screen, half listening, half dreaming. Romance in this time and place is a thing of poetry, music, and controlled mystery. Women do not court. They are courted through sound, through stories, through gesture. And yet, you feel. You feel sharply. You're the daughter of a wealthy merchant, or perhaps a noble Mughal family. You've been taught Persian calligraphy, the recitation of couplets from Rumi and Hafiz, and how to apply kohl with a precision more ceremonial than cosmetic. Your life is cloistered in marble and fragrance. Every courtyard is walled, every path indirect. But your mind travels freely. The mainstream historical reality is this Mughal noblewomen lived behind the veil physically and socially. Known as purdah, the practice of female seclusion restricted women's presence in public and formal arenas. Upper-class women were expected to remain within the zanana, the women's quarters. Courtship, when it happened at all, unfolded through music poetry gifts and intermediaries, not through casual meetings or shared activities. Marriages were arranged by families, often with the aim of strengthening political or economic alliances. And yet, despite this enclosure, Mughal women were far from silent. Some wrote poetry. Some were patrons of architecture and art. Some even wielded political influence from behind screens. But in matters of love, most were expected to listen, not to speak. The young man who might be courting you, if one dares to say such a thing, would never knock at your door or speak to you directly. Instead, he might bribe a palace servant to deliver you a riddle in verse. He might perform a song beneath your window, subtly respectfully pretending to serenade the moon. And if your heart stirred, you would stir your anklets at just the right moment. Not a word spoken, but everything said. And yet, even a single misstep could spell disaster. If a servant gossiped, if your mother noticed a shift in your expression, if the suitor grew bold and addressed you without permission, it could all collapse. Reputation was fragile. Your name, your future, your very survival as a respectable woman depended on stillness. The strangest part. Sometimes the women loved anyway. There is a famous tale part, history part, folklore of a Mughal woman named Merunisa. She was a widow, beautiful and brilliant, and eventually became the consort of Emperor Jahangir. Before that, though she lived in the women's quarters, invisible to most. Jahangir, they say, saw her at a palace festival, veiled but radiant, and fell deeply in love. He waited years to marry her. When he did, she rose to unprecedented influence, even signing imperial decrees in her name, Nur Jahan, Light of the World. Historians still debate the authenticity of their love story. Some argue it was a carefully crafted myth to justify her rise to power. Others insist their mutual devotion was rare, but real. What remains undisputed is her impact. She became one of the most politically powerful women in Mughal history, all while technically remaining behind the curtain. Your own life is less grand. There are no emperors waiting outside your screen. Only that music again from the courtyard. A new melody, melancholy slow. Your heart tugs. Later that evening, during the changing of oil lamps, a folded note appears inside your jewelry box. No one saw it placed there. No one claims to have touched it. Your breath catches. It contains no name. Just a line from a poem. I have not seen your eyes. But the moon does not hide without reason. You sit with it for a long time. Your pulse quickens, though you show nothing. Later, you burn the note as you must. But the words stay with you. The next morning, a new suitor arrives. A formal meeting is arranged, your parent speaking to his. You are not in the room. You sit 3 chambers away behind carved screens listening to the cadence of their voices and trying to detect tone in the muffled laughter. Afterward, your mother gives you her verdict. He is suitable. No scandals, no debts. His mother is a pious woman. The astrologers approve. A good match. And what about the music? You will never know if it was him. Or maybe you will. On your wedding night. When he says something, some line, some word, that sounds just enough like the poem to make you wonder, but never to ask. That is the curse and the poetry of love in Purta. The birds call in the courtyard now. A parrot recites a phrase you once taught it, and you smile. In your world, even the animals speak more freely than you. But you do not resent it, not fully. You understand the trade. Safety, stability, honor for silence, waiting, and veils. Still, you wish sometimes that the veil could lift not just from your face, but from your thoughts. You imagine walking out into that courtyard, alone, unchaperoned. You imagine asking, "Was it you?" And if he smiled, what would you say next? But you never speak the dream aloud. Instead, you take out your brush and compose a verse. Not for him, for yourself. If silence is the only garden I am given, I will plant my heart in it and wait for the wind to bloom. You leave it unsigned. Fold it. Tuck it between the pages of your poetry book. Perhaps your future daughter will find it one day and wonder just for a moment who you really were. And maybe that's enough. Behind you, the veil shifts again. A servant clears her throat gently. Your mother calls. You rise. Not because you are told, but because you must. And as you walk away from the window, the music starts again. Lower, softer, still sweet. He plays. But you do not turn back. The air shifts again, not with silk or sand or incense this time, but with the crisp scent of powdered wigs, orange blossom water, and the faint musty perfume of a theater curtain. The world no longer smells like jasmine or rose attar, it smells like artifice, wax powder, and expectation. You blink, and your veil is gone. So is the screen, the embroidery hoop, and the courtyard flute. You are now in 18th century Europe, perhaps in France, or in Austria, or somewhere within the cultivated courts of Germany. Wherever you are, it is a world where love has become theater, not just metaphorically, but quite literally. You look down and realize that your gown is enormous. A brocade pannier spreads like butterfly wings on either side of your hips. Your bodice rises sharply, your hair is curled and puffed, and your feet are impossibly dainty. Nothing here feels natural. Even your smile has to be learned. But you are not a royal. You're not even a duchess. You're the daughter of a minor nobleman, perhaps, or the niece of a merchant who's managed to buy his way into polite society. You're not expected to marry for love, at least not officially. But the idea of romantic feeling has become something of a fashion trend. And just like rouge lace and gossip, it must be performed. In the salons, people recite verses by Rousseau and sigh dramatically. In the garden pavilions, couples murmur behind painted fans, their every word calculated. And in the theater boxes, you sit and pretend to cry during operas you barely understand because it's the elegant thing to do. If you are lucky, you'll fall in love with someone who knows his lines, who delivers his compliments with the proper flourish, who knows how to flirt without sweating, to flatter without sincerity, and to retreat with dignity when you pretend to faint. Because here affection isn't real unless it's theatrical. The mainstream historical fact is that the 18th century, particularly in Enlightenment-era Europe, was a time when romantic expression became performative, codified, and deeply stylized. The emergence of the cult of sensibility encouraged emotional displays, but only within certain social boundaries. Letters were laced with metaphors and philosophical references. Love declarations were expected to be as refined as classical poetry. Falling in love became a kind of aesthetic practice among the elite rather than a genuine upheaval of the heart. You may send a letter, not directly of course, but via a trusted maid or a mutual friend decorated with pressed violets or sealed with scented wax. You may compose a riddle, a verse, a rebus. But if you're too obvious, too earnest, too raw, you'll be seen as vulgar, or worse, provincial. There is a phrase that drifts through the salons like perfume. She loved inelegantly. It's a damning thing to say. You sip tea carefully, without slurping, and listen to your chaperone drone about your cousin's successful marriage to a viscount. Her secret, a flawless décolleté and a well-timed feint at the opera. You begin to wonder if all women here are actresses, or if they've simply been written into roles too long to forget their names. One of the quirkiest details you overhear in a salon while pretending to embroider a useless lace handkerchief is that some women of your rank are so committed to performing romantic elegance that they keep books of rehearsed sighs and responses learned from their favorite plays. One woman even commissions a playwright to script her next 3 weeks of correspondence with a suitor she hasn't yet met. And everyone around her applauds her foresight. Later that evening, you walk through the palace gardens, your pannier swaying your slippers, crunching gravel, and a young gentleman offers you a peach. You accept it with the right degree of amused restraint. He compares your cheek to the fruit. You raise one eyebrow exactly as Madame de Bissette taught you. And yet, behind the script, you feel something flicker. Not love, perhaps, but a want to speak without thinking. To laugh without posing. To tell him you once fell off a pony and got a scar behind your ear. To ask if he's afraid of dying, or whether he knows how to boil an egg. You don't ask. Instead, you curtsy. Historians still argue whether all of this elegance was empowering or exhausting for women. Some scholars say the theater of love gave women new agency and ability to communicate through coded gestures, letters, and layered meanings. Others argue it confined them further, demanding constant emotional labor to maintain appearances, turning affection into performance, and performance into identity. You think of that as you stand in the mirrored ballroom, later spinning under chandeliers, smiling at the right time, blushing just slightly when touched. One suitor sends you a poem that ends with, "If love is a mask, let us wear it well." Until the curtain falls, you laugh. But not because it's funny, because it's true. The next week, you receive 4 more poems, 2 gifts, and a lock of hair you did not ask for. Your aunt is thrilled. She thinks the Count de Revoir is ideal, wealthy, sharp with a good family. You think he smells like vinegar and recites verses like a distracted schoolboy. But when he proposes, your chaperone weeps with joy. You nod. You say yes. You've learned the lines. On your wedding night, he quotes Molière in bed. You pretend to be delighted. Then he snores. The next morning, you slip away to the garden and write a new poem not for him, not for anyone, just to feel your own voice again. My mouth knew the script. My hands wore the ring. But I do not recall who wrote my part. You fold the paper and burn it before breakfast. Years pass. You host salons now. You teach your nieces how to sip, smile, and curtsy. You praise their posture, their clever metaphors, their subtle displays of wit. You even quote your younger self, half ironically, of course. And yet, sometimes, when the candles have gone out and the curtains flutter slightly in the wind, you remember that man with the peach and wonder if he ever asked anyone how to boil an egg. You will never know. The curtain fell. The play ended, and you took your final bow with grace. But not, you think quietly, with joy. You open your eyes, but you don't know where you are. Not at first. There is no flute from the courtyard. No painted fan brushing across your chin. No lattice screen casting delicate shadows on the floor. The floor itself is unfamiliar, neither silk rugged like Mughal India, nor polished and mirrored like Enlightenment France. It's just a wooden plank floor scuffed from shoes you don't remember wearing. Your dress is heavy Victorian again, perhaps, or something close to it. The bodice is tight, but less crushing than before. And outside, there's no palace, no pyramid, just a quiet gray street with a single gas lamp flickering dimly in the dusk. This is not a specific place anymore. It is all of them. All the timelines, all the waiting rooms of women's love stories blurred into one. You take a step, and your shoes clack against the wood. You recognize the rhythm. It's the sound of departure, of finally maybe walking away. Behind you lie centuries of layered expectation, of fans, veils, poems, and chaperones, of gazes that meant too much, and touches that meant too little. You are no longer just one woman in one story. You are the sum of them all. You are the girl behind the screen in China, the widow staring out at the hedgerow in Victorian England, the young noblewoman clutching a fruit in a formal French garden. You are the servant girl who dreamed of more, and the empress who still felt unseen. You are the one who waited too long, and the one who chose too soon. And now you are tired. Dating, for all its romantic trappings, has always been a performance, a delicate, dangerous dance between emotion and expectation. And for women throughout history, that dance came with rules so sharp you could bleed from smiling at the wrong time. Mainstream historical records show that in nearly every major society, Victorian, Mughal, medieval, Edo era, ancient Egyptian romantic courtship was designed less around personal connection and more around social survival. Whether through dowries, chaperones, or charts of compatibility, love was an equation rarely left unsupervised. And what's perhaps most revealing, even when women were admired, adored, or elevated, it was almost never without cost. You think now of the girl who wrote a love poem on papyrus and never sent it. Of the Mughal bride who burned her verses by candlelight. Of the Victorian girl who wanted a walk in the park, not a parlor visit supervised by two aunts. All of them knew longing. But longing across these centuries has always been considered more appropriate than fulfillment. That's the odd, quiet truth. Yearning is safe. Wanting in silence is permitted. But to want openly, to pursue, to ask, to choose, that has almost always been punished. There is in a dusty French archive a bizarre but delightful detail from 1784, a noblewoman so frustrated with the boundaries of her courtship that she hired an actor to impersonate a rival suitor just to make the man she liked jealous enough to propose. It worked. But she was shunned afterward for her unnatural behavior. Apparently, manipulating men's affections was only acceptable if done through fan language or inheritance law. Historians still debate whether the increasing theatricality of romance in the 18th and 19th centuries liberated women or trapped them further. Some argue that coded communication gave women a secret voice. Others suggest it only masked their silence with prettier metaphors. But what is not debated, what is overwhelmingly clear, is that the toll was real. You think of the corsets, the mourning periods, the forbidden letters, the matchmakers, the veils, the side glances, the rehearsed sighs, the literal death by scandal some girls faced after being seen talking to the wrong man. And all for what? To be called someone's wife. To be remembered not for who you were, but for whom you belonged to. And now you laugh. Softly, sadly, but also with a tiny bit of triumph. Because you're no longer there. Not really. The theater's curtains are down. The palace bells have stopped. You are not in 1852. Or 1782, or 1282, you are here, in the present, And here, you can date badly, loudly, casually, or not at all. You can ghost, or swipe, or say no thanks without fearing for your family's farm. You can wear too much perfume or none. You can love once or twice or never. You can propose. You can leave. You can cry or laugh, or make a terrible playlist of sad songs on your phone, and no one will come to confiscate your dowry. Of course, it's not perfect. It never is. But compared to all those who came before you, dating now is less about survival and more about discovery. And that matters. You step forward. The street hums faintly beneath your feet. A breeze lifts your skirts. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimes. Not a chapel bell, not a palace summons, just a soft signal that time is passing. You walk, not toward anyone, just forward. And for the first time, no one is watching. No chaperone, no parent, no matchmaker peering through curtains. No astrologer checking your charts. No poet scribbling metaphors for your modesty. Just you. And you begin to wonder, if no one else were watching, who would you love? What would your courtship look like if it were written by you alone? Would it involve tea and slow walks, or stargazing and long letters, or maybe just laughter over burnt toast? The freedom is dizzying, but it's yours. You keep walking. The layers of memory fall away like costumes. The silks, the laces, the corsets, the sashes. You are left with breath, skin, and possibility. Not everyone got this far, but you have. So now, as your head sinks into the pillow and your eyes grow heavier, let the curtain close slowly, not on a stage, but on centuries of rehearsed gestures and careful smiles. The women you've walked with tonight, each of them dreaming, resisting, or simply enduring, are quiet now. Their stories do not end in fireworks. They end in murmurs, in unsent letters, in whispered poems folded beneath combs and tucked inside sleeves. But their echoes carried you here. And now, it's your turn to rest, not just from the weight of their traditions, but from your own day, your own journey, your own thoughts. Whatever choices you've made, or paths you haven't taken, they're safe here. No audience waits for your applause. No judgment lingers behind the fan. Just the rhythm of your breathing. The hush of history easing away. The calm of knowing that in 1,000 years, no one will ask how eloquently you sighed or how gracefully you flirted. They will wonder whether you felt something real, whether your silence was chosen or simply inherited. Tonight, there are no rules to remember, no posture to correct, no veil to lower, just you, your breath, and this quiet, slow drift into sleep. And so as the final curtain falls, not with drama, but with peace, you exhale and let go. So now, as your head sinks into the pillow and your eyes grow heavier, let the curtain close slowly, not on a stage, but on centuries of rehearsed gestures and careful smiles. The women you've walked with tonight, each of them dreaming, resisting, or simply enduring, are quiet now. Their stories do not end in fireworks. They end in murmurs, in unsent letters, in whispered poems folded beneath combs and tucked inside sleeves. But their echoes carried you here. And now, it's your turn to rest, not just from the weight of their traditions, but from your own day, your own journey, your own thoughts. Whatever choices you've made, or paths you haven't taken, they're safe here. No audience waits for your applause. No judgment lingers behind the fan. Just the rhythm of your breathing. The hush of history easing away. The calm of knowing that in 1,000 years, no one will ask how eloquently you sighed or how gracefully you flirted. They will wonder whether you felt something real, whether your silence was chosen or simply inherited. Tonight, there are no rules to remember, no posture to correct, No veil to lower. Just you, your breath, and this quiet, slow drift into sleep. And so as the final curtain falls, not with drama, but with peace, you exhale and let go.